Hello and welcome to the Good Information Project's political panel on housing solutions. I'm Michelle Hennessy and I'll be hosting today's political panel. Now joining me today is, and this is in alphabetical order in the interest of fairness, People Before Profit TD Richard Boyd Barrett, Sinn Féin TD Eoin O'Brien, Deputy Cian O'Callaghan of the Social Democrats, Fine Gael Senator John Cummins, Green Party TD Francis Noel Duffy, Fianna Fáil Senator Mary Fitzpatrick and Labour Senator Rebecca Moynihan. Thanks to all of you for joining me. Now, over the last month, the Good Information Project has been exploring various issues under that wide umbrella term, the housing crisis. But we wanted to do more than just talk about the problems. And that's why we brought in experts into the project to discuss potential solutions to those problems. Now, this panel discussion is not an opportunity for finger pointing. The focus today is not on whose fault it is that we're in this mess. The focus is not on who's been objecting to planning proposals. The focus today is on solutions to this problem. So with that in mind, let's get started. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pitch some of the ideas that we've had throughout the project so far, either from people who've written for us, who we've spoken to, experts from our recent panel run by my colleague Conal Thomas, and also some polling that we had done as part of the project. And what I'm going to ask the panelists to do is I'm going to put some of the ideas to you. I'm going to say who thinks this is a good idea or who'd be for or against this. And I'll get you to raise your hand just so that people can see. And the first thing I want us to talk about is this recent paper from the Economic and Social Research Institute last month, which said the government could help solve this crisis if it borrowed an additional 4 billion to 7 billion per year. So I'm going to get you to do hands up and I'll pick a couple of people. Who here thinks that we should take this advice? Oh, I haven't asked the question yet. Who thinks we should take this advice and borrow more to build more? Okay, so Owen, I'll bring you in on that one since you were so eager.
Sure. No, I think this is a really important paper and it builds on work that the Economic and Social Research Institute have been doing for some time. Sinn Féin has been arguing for many years that we need to double direct capital investment in public housing, that's social, affordable cost rental and affordable purchase. At the moment, direct capital expenditure is about 1.2 billion out of the overall housing budget. That delivers just about 10 or 11,000 public homes a year, the majority of those social. If we want to move towards the 18,000 public homes that the ESRI are recommending, or the 20,000 public homes that Sinn Féin is recommending, we have to double that capital expenditure. And therefore in budget 2022, that will be announced in October, we want to see that capital expenditure double. A significant amount of that will come from revenue expenditure, but given how cheap it is for government to borrow right now, if a mainstream economic think tank like the ESRI is saying it would be prudent to do so, and that's what that report says, then government should take that advice. But crucially, the homes have to be affordable. That means homes to buy for 250,000 euros or less in Dublin and lower outside, and affordable cost rental between 700 and 900 euro a month in Dublin and less outside. That is the only way government can significantly make a dent in this housing crisis.
John, can I bring you in on that one? What's your take on this?
Yeah, no, look, I broadly agree with what Owen has stated, but the government is doing just that. We have the largest budget for housing in the history of the state, and this year alone we're rolling out 410 cost rental units, and we're actually going significantly now into affordable purchase units with the affordable housing bill that has already passed. And you know, the figures there in terms of social housing, we've drastically ramped up production of social housing over the last number of years, and we're in a very good position to build on that even further. So, you know, the figures that Owen has spoken about there, they're in line with what the government targets are. In fact, in 2015, the targets that were set by Sinn Féin, the government has actually exceeded in terms of social housing provision in the period 2016 to 2020. And that's before we even account for the 2021 figures, which we're going to provide 12,500 homes this year. And that's social homes. And then
John,
410
can I ask
homes.
Can I ask just on this advice from the ESRI? I mean, what do you think specifically about this advice to borrow between 4 billion and 7 billion extra a year? Do you think that we should be doing that?
Well, obviously you need to borrow in order to build. But
do you think we should be borrowing to that level though?
Well, if that's what's necessary in order to deliver the quantum of homes that is required, then yes. But there is a finite ability to be able to deliver housing units across all the sectors, be it social, affordable, private, and it's the same people that ultimately are going to be building these homes. So we do have to ramp up the likes of apprenticeships. We have a skills shortage in this country, and if we're to meet the ambitious targets of getting to 33,000 homes, and my party believes that we should aspire to get to 40,000 homes built during this decade, well then we have to use every mechanism possible in order to deliver housing, and that goes for local authorities, approved housing bodies, land development agencies, public-private partnerships and private builders. If we only use one or two or three of those, we're not going to have the impact that we need. We have to use all tools at the state's disposal.
And something that I want to ask everyone on the panel about is this term affordable, because it means different things to different people. And recent polling that we did, the majority of people put an affordable house at between 200,000 and 299,000. So I might just ask each of you in turn what you consider to be an affordable house. And you can give me a range if you want, or just one figure. So Rebecca, I'll start with you. What's an affordable house?
Because I think one of the key things that the ESRI said in that report is...
Sorry, Rebecca, can I get you to put your microphone down? I can't hear you.
Sorry, I just want to come back in on the ESRI question there, because one of the important things that they said in the report is that state expenditure will crowd in rather than crowd out private funding. And I think what we see, and particularly in places like Dublin, where I represent, what we see is that private investors aren't investing in long-term apartments for people to buy. They're investing in things like student accommodation. They're investing in things like build to rent. So I think that's one of the key points in terms of the ESI report, is that the state needs to fill that gap that the market isn't filling for the delivery of homes. And I think when it comes to affordable homes, and I think all of us here, most of us here on the Housing Committee, what all the experts say is affordable homes are related to income. And it's about 30%, 30 to 35% of people's net income. And I think that's one of the key things that are missing from the Affordable Housing Bill in terms of in a definition of affordability related to income. That will change. If people earn more money, that will change. But what we need to do is try and make sure that the state are building homes that are affordable to people's income. And what we see in the Affordable Housing Bill is they're essentially tying it to market rent or below market rent. And I think that's a key thing that we're missing in the initiatives that the government are taking. So it's about 30%.
Rebecca, sorry, I'm going to move on to something else, because I want this to be just a quick round. If people can just give me numbers in this, we're obviously going to talk about other solutions and policies later on in terms of social housing. Mary, can I just come to you? What would be your figure for an affordable house, or your range?
Yeah, I suppose the government's range is 165,000 to about 300,000. So that's the range of affordability. But just in terms of the SRI report, it is really important and it's really timely. And to address affordability, it's not just about the financing of it, which is hugely important, but it is actually about how we spend the money. And the two pieces of legislation that the government has enacted are creating a change where the state will lead in the provision of affordability, because the market has absolutely failed in that space. And housing is now unaffordable for more than 80% of the population in Dublin. So the state has to change that, and we're changing it in two ways. One, we're going to use state-owned land to actually deliver affordability, both affordable homes to purchase and to rent. And secondly, we're actually legislating so local authorities can, for the first time, deliver affordable homes. And we will be setting affordable housing targets for every local authority, and the approved housing bodies will be enabled, and housing cooperatives will be enabled to deliver. And the state is going to directly intervene to ensure affordability is delivered. And as I said, in the price range of 165,000 to 300,000. That's what we need to be achieving. And in big cities like Dublin and Cork, it has to be that 100%, and this is what we've legislated for, or are legislating for, 100% of the state-owned land will be used to deliver affordability in homes. And that's what's required.
Okay, Frances, can I get your figure? At some stage, I think somebody is going to just give me a number and not expand on it.
I just did.
Frances, what's your number?
I've been in the business for practicing for 20 years, and the cost to build a house is around 200 grand. That's the actual cost of bricks and mortar. It's typically split 50-50 between materials and labour. And I've recently kind of put that across to one. He's not a developer, he's a contractor who's building quite a few houses in Dublin in the private space, but he says around 200 grand is the cost. And the bills that are going through at the moment are working from that cost, not for working from market, as Rebecca's saying, it's working from the cost. At least that's your opinion. What I'm pursuing as a politician and from the green policy is that the cost rental is cost rental based on the cost of the mortgage of that property. That's what cost rental is. The Vienna model is cost, so it's based on the rent or the mortgage of the property.
And you have limited profit in there.
The profit is for if I want to
4%.
invest, if I want to invest personally my money into a property like the bank might, because that's where a lot of the money is coming from, is from the bank. So if the state is borrowing from the bank, they pay an interest on that. If I come along as an investor, it's capped at 3.5%, the same way a bank is charging. That's what that equity share is. And then there's maintenance, the maintenance of the property, that would be index linked in the context of maintaining that property in its lifetime. So that's that cost. In the context of affordable purchase, it's the same thing. It's the bricks and mortar cost X. The land and the site essentially are coming free to that. So the purchaser pays the cost of the bricks and mortar. And bricks and mortar, from the analysis and research I've done, speaking to contractors and doing them and building them myself, is that it costs 200 grand, in the region of 200 grand. I was chatting to a Coulon director this morning, and they've been selling for 166 two-bed apartments. But they've also, then it goes higher than that. But that depends on the contractor and where the market's at. Now, one last thing, I've been chatting to a lot of contractors recently about the market. We've been in, that tools have been down for the last year and a half. People are ramping up. There's lots of contractors buying in lots of stocks, and the prices are going through the roof. And they're saying it'll be next year before that settles back as well. So there's going to be issues in the next 6 to 12 months in the cost of everything, because it's being ramped up and everybody's buying all the stock that's there.
Richard, I'm going to bring you in here, Richard. What's an affordable house?
Affordable is between 25% and 30% of your income. Anything more than that is not affordable. So linking it to market prices, as the government is doing explicitly, contrary to what Mary has said, in the legislation, explicitly linked to market conditions and market prices, and indeed local market conditions, which vary from place to place, mean that it's not about affordability, it's about the market. And that's precisely what we need to break. So our view, and we put forward amendments in the legislation to this effect, is that when the state is providing housing, it is linked to your income. It's not about the market, and it's not about the cost of building. It's about what you can afford. And that, to me, is the definition of affordability. People at the moment are paying 40, 50, 60, and more often it's towards the higher end, 60 and sometimes 70% of their income on putting a roof over their head. That is completely unsustainable. And can we afford that? And this is an important point to say, to link it to income. Of course we can, because as the ESRI are pointing out, the state can borrow very cheaply, and it can carry this the cost recovery over a longer period of time than the private market can. So it is quite capable of delivering affordable housing, whether it's affordable rental or affordable purchase, at between 25 and 30% of your income. And that is genuine affordability, and that's our view.
Cian, I'm going to bring you in now. What's affordable? What's an affordable home?
I agree. Affordability has to be linked to income. So a maximum of about a third of your income on your rent or your mortgage and your utilities is what affordability should be defined as. And that should be in the Affordable Housing Bill, and it isn't. And that's a key gap. In practical terms, what does that mean? The kind of affordable purchase homes that O'Coulon are building, for example, up in Dunedin and Lusk, where two-bed apartment is going to be at about €166,000, three-bed semi-detached at about €258,000. That's real affordable homes being delivered. The issue is it's on a very small scale, and we actually need thousands of those. And that's where the ESRI paper comes in. They make the argument very, very strongly. Not only can we afford to borrow to do that, they make the argument that we can't afford not to do that. That's in our economic interest. If we don't do that, we're going to have a competitive issue. We're going to continue to have a competitiveness issue. And just to say that the government price caps of up to 500,000 for an affordable apartment is not, in Dublin City, is not affordable at all. And we need to be looking more at the kind of 166,000 to 250,000, that kind of range, so that people on average incomes can afford to buy their own home.
So this O'Coulon model, Cian, and I think Francis, you also mentioned it, this co-op idea has been pitched, and it was actually something suggested by our expert panelists. Two of them said this is something that we should be expanding on. Now, they said it's not necessarily a complete solution. Not every housing estate or every housing project can be one of these cooperative housing solutions, but they said we need to be doing an awful lot more of it. Can I bring somebody in who wants to come in on that, who's in favour of us massively expanding this? Eoin, can I bring you in, and can you maybe just explain to people who are watching exactly what it is if they're not familiar?
Well, the crucial thing about the O'Coulon model is the model itself. So it's not that you would want one organisation to do all of the homes, although I'd like to see O'Coulon do a lot more. But that particular model for delivering affordable homes should be replicated by local authorities, approved housing bodies and community housing trusts. And essentially, the way it works is that the land and the servicing of the site and the general area is covered by the state. Private building contractors working with a local authority or an approved housing body or a co-op, they build the homes. And then the purchaser buys them essentially at the cost of the building of the homes. And that's why you can sell them for between 160 and 250,000. With the current government scheme, there is a kind of a clawback whereby, because you don't pay for the land or the site servicing, at a future point in time, for example, if you ever sell the house or if you pass the house on to your family, the cost of the land and the site servicing as a percentage of the future market value is clawed back by the state. That's not the worst model because it still allows people to buy the homes at affordable prices, and there's no interest on the equity portion that the local authority has. But there are better models than that, and we've advocated very strongly for a particular kind of model whereby you don't own the land, but you own the house on the land, and therefore there's no equity stake that has to be paid back. But either of those models delivers genuine affordability. The key, however, is this: you can only deliver that on scale if direct capital investment by government in the delivery of affordable homes to rent or buy increases. This year, we're only getting 35 million for affordable rental and about 50 million for affordable purchase. And that's going to deliver just over 500 affordable homes between the two schemes. We need about 8,000 of these affordable homes every single year for a decade to make a dent in this crisis. And that's why the real test isn't necessarily the passing of the Affordable Housing Bill, some of which is okay, some of which in my view is very, very weak. It's how much money government puts into affordable housing in Budget 2022 in October. And so far, we haven't heard an awful lot from government as to how much they're going to increase. And that's why I think John's comments are interesting. If Gael is proposing doubling capital investment in delivery of social affordable homes, that's a big change, and I would welcome that. I suspect Pascal Donoghue has a slightly more restrictive view of the level of capital investment. But without that money, there won't be the targets of the local authorities and the AHBs, and there won't be affordable homes. So that model is key, and we need to see that rolled out on a scale we have yet to see to date.
Mary, can I bring you in on this one? I mean, obviously, it's a model that does work because we have seen it work, and they can deliver homes that are affordable. They can deliver homes that people on lower incomes can get a mortgage for example. But can it technically work on a much larger scale in this country?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I am very familiar with the O'Coulon model, and it is a great model. And I think Ali Gretton herself said it, city architect on your panel. You know, she said they have a flexibility that local authorities don't have, that public bodies don't have. And that's why when we're legislating, and why we've legislated in the Land Development Agency and the Affordable Housing Bill, is to give not just local authorities the power to deliver affordable homes, but also to give approved housing bodies and other non-for-profit or NGOs the ability to actually deliver affordable homes. And that's really a game changer, you know, in terms of, Eoin said it, there has been a significant change in government policy. We have legislated to have the state take the lead in addressing not just supply, but also affordability. So we have the biggest social housing programme in a decade underway at the moment. But what we don't have, and what there hasn't been in place, I guess, for the last 10 years, is a state-led affordable housing programme. That's what we will have. And to be fair, Eoin is correct. There hasn't been an announcement for Budget 23 yet, But the minister is going to announce a new Housing for All plan in July, which is going to take into account all of the legislative changes that we've made. To a certain extent, if we had put more money to this prior to now, without the legislative changes that we've made, it couldn't have been spent by either the local authorities or the approved housing bodies. So it is really critically important that as we go forward, and the Housing for All plan that will be launched in July will have multi-annual targets, multi-annual budgets. And Eoin says he wants to see 8,000. I'd actually like to see 10,000 affordable homes delivered over the next 5 years. I do think we need to get to that critical mass. It has to be scaled up at a very significant level to deliver affordability, I suppose most acutely in Dublin, but also Cork and other areas. And even in rural, like small rural villages, you know, there's opportunities in small rural villages all around the country for local authorities where they own land to actually deliver affordable homes now that we've legislated for affordable homes both to purchase and to rent. And I suppose Eoin does make an interesting distinction between the Sinn Féin affordable housing and the model that the government is proposing, whereby under the Sinn Féin model, you can buy the house, but you can't buy the land that the house is going to be built on. And I suppose it's a nuance. I appreciate that he does think that, you know, and supports at least people being able to purchase not just an affordable home, but also the land that it'll be located on. I think home ownership is something that's in our psyche. It's something that I suppose is very important. And we recognise that that's an ambition that an awful lot of people want and legitimately want. But we also are legislating and going to be funding at a much greater scale the affordable cost rental. And that will provide secure rental accommodation on a long-term basis at affordable prices. And the affordability will be determined by people's income, not by the market. It'll be determined by people's income. And that has been said, it has been said categorically by the minister, by the Land Development Agency, who will partner with local authorities and approved housing bodies. Because if we don't address both affordability and supply, it's not going to work.
I mean, I think on that topic of affordable rental, because I am conscious that there are lots of people watching for whom it might never be a reality, home ownership, and that home ownership can often dominate the discussions that we have about the housing crisis in this country. There are lots of people in this country who are renting. There are lots of people in this country who will continue to rent for a long period of time, maybe their entire lives. And one of the ideas that came from our expert panel is a suggestion that we switch our rental model to cost per square metre. So we'll do a hands up on that. Who agrees with the cost per square metre rental idea? Richard, I'll bring you in on that.
Yeah, and we've been arguing this for some time, is that we need rent controls, not just rent freezes, which we should absolutely have, and not just rent pressure zones, which limit the level of increases, but where we actually set the rents based on the size and the quality of the housing. And I see no reason why that couldn't be done, either by local authorities or by a rent board, that they simply, if somebody wants to rent something, there is a board or an authority that has the power to go in and say, this is all you can charge for that. And that is broadly linked to what is affordable for people on average incomes. So that's genuine rent control. It's not uncommon in other parts of the world, because the point is, even about rent freezes now, rents are at such shocking levels and people are paying astronomical prices for box apartments. It's obscene, to be honest. It's obscene, and it is unsustainable. So absolutely, we need clearly set rent controls where you are told you cannot charge more than this amount for this property. Now, there might be some arguments about the quality differences, and they could be taken into account by a rent setting board, but broadly it should be linked to the size of the property, and the sort of racketeering level of rents that we're seeing at the moment has to be eliminated on that basis.
Okay, John, what's your take on this idea of cost per square metre for rentals?
Just in relation to the affordable purchase, just a point that Eoin made there in a distinction, and I think it's important for your viewers actually to know the distinction between what Eoin is proposing and what the government is proposing, because under Owen's plan, you'll get a mortgage for 200,000. You'll pay it off over 20 or 30 years. But ultimately, at the end of it, you won't be able to sell it on to whoever you want at that point in time. You won't be. If the council chooses to believe that, somebody in your family is above a certain income threshold, you won't actually be able to pass it on to them.
I have to point out here that Eoin is shaking his head aggressively in the negative to that.
And I'd like to hear him explain the policy there, because I do think it's important in relation to the rents. What the government is actually doing is introducing a cost rental model. We've heard about the Vienna model so many times. That's exactly what the government is actually actioning now. Obviously, they started their cost rental model after World War II, and they have a significant level of stock. And we're starting now from scratch, and we'll have 410 units delivered this year. But as Mary said, we need to scale that, and we need to build that over the next number of years. And what that's going to do is it's going to have rents at least 25% below market rent. And actually over time, because that rent is going to be linked to index linked to inflation, that it's actually going to get more affordable versus the market over time. And cost rental is based on the inputs into it. It's based on the cost of building and financing that development. It's not based on anything else. So, that is what the government is doing. It's a key plank of the affordable housing bill, and it is going to be rolled out predominantly across our main urban cities over the next number of years.
I want to move on now to a slightly different topic, another sort of model or idea that has been pitched. Sometimes it wasn't popular with our expert panel, so I'm eager to see how it flies among the politicians. This idea that instead of building out, that we build up instead. Cian, can I bring you in on that? What's your take on it?
Yeah, no, look, certainly in terms of sustainability, do we need to increase densities? We absolutely do. There's different ways of doing that. That doesn't always have to be about building up. You can, if you look at some of the more denser parts of Dublin City, around Stoneybatter, for example, in my own constituency areas like Marino, you actually have a lot of housing without necessarily building it up. The key to it is putting in good infrastructure, good amenities, good facilities. But there, a lot of people will be happy to live in a denser area if you get the good facilities and amenities with that, if you get good parks, if you get good open spaces. What people don't want is that they have the kind of costs of living in higher density housing without getting those benefits as well. So we have to do it right. It has to be planned well. We have to put more resources into getting our planning right. But yeah, in terms of sustainability, it is very, very important that we build denser housing. But it's not just, that isn't just about height. It can be very effective in other ways as well. And I think part of the conversation around this has to be around talking to people as well and saying, well, where do you want to live? What do you want where you live? It can't all just be done in a kind of top-down level from a planning point of view. It has to be a conversation with people as well. It has to be about building communities, not just kind of, housing. That's the really important thing. People want to live in sustainable communities, not just areas where a lot of housing is shoved in quickly without good planning. That's what makes really successful neighbourhoods. And that's what's really important for kind of, if you do that well at the outset, then you don't spend the next 10, 20, 30 years trying to retrofit facilities and amenities into neighbourhoods and communities. You don't have to have the communities spending all that time campaigning for things that should have been delivered at the start. And this is actually where land comes into it. If we're serious about this and serious about affordability, what we should be doing is we should be bringing in CPO powers so we can buy up land when zoned at agricultural zoning, so we can buy it up relatively cheap and then plan out really good communities and infrastructure. And that includes, improving densities and putting in public transport and doing that really well. And that's what's done very well in other countries. So it delivers really successful housing communities and good affordability at the same time. And that's a lot of what we're missing at the moment, what needs to be done.
I'll move to Rebecca on this one as well. I mean, how high is too high?
So I think we've probably got a little bit skewed in terms of height. This idea that when we need to go up, we need to go up in a very high way, where you can get density without the heights that are being proposed, for example, by people like Johnny Ronan or by things like Clare Wills, the site that's there, where you have a large 16-storey and a large 19-storey, but actually then you have it going from 2 to 3 stories. I grew up in the inner city. I like density. I support good quality quality density that supports sustainable cities and sustainable communities. But I think you can get that on a more human scale, that you can get good quality density with facilities that surround it without going up along the developer-led planning, the Johnny Ronans of this world, that you have to go high into the sky. The department, there's been a lot of analysis done on this, and it actually gets more expensive when you go above 8 stories. So you're well able to do good quality, dense 8-story developments, not just in the inner city, but throughout the city. And if we look at other European countries, that's what they have. They don't just have it in the inner core, they have it spread out throughout the suburbs as well. And I think that's where we need to be going, as opposed to landing 22 stories without context here, or 19 stories without context there. We need to be moving to more sustainable planning in that sense. And when I hear people talk about the 15-minute city, which I think has become very popular, founded by the Paris mayor, claimed by James Gagan that he came up with the idea himself. But actually a 15-minute city is about having enough people living in the area, that you have good cycle infrastructure, you have good transport networks, it's walkable for people, and they're the types of communities that we want to be building. So I think what we need to get to is we need to get to more density. That doesn't necessarily mean going up sky high. And I think we need to be able to challenge that from some of the kind of developers who are saying that we need to go up very high. What we need is good quality density, places like Paris, places like Berlin, where you have good quality apartment blocks with facilities that are supported. You've good quality transport around it, you have schools, you have infrastructure. That's where we need to be getting and building a city for the next 200 years, and not just this cycle of a construction boom.
Francis, can I pull you in on that as well? Because particularly on the sustainability side of that proposal, what's your take?
Yeah, no, 6-7 stories, I can't disagree with the previous speakers. And I know Orla Hegarty and North Conserve referred to it as well. Like, I've spent a lot of time in Barcelona and Paris and Berlin with students looking at housing schemes and how to build them properly with density and, you know, transport infrastructure. And I think Lorcan mentioned it, where you know, that you can live in a block of 6-7 stories. I visualize Barcelona in this, and you can go downstairs and you can go into your bar or your convenience store or whatever it is, or your workplace. Like, you are living in a 15-minute city if you're living in those types of cities, because there's a metro or a subway right beside you. So it gets unsustainable once you go over 7-8 stories. Unsustainable, you know, both environmentally and to service those buildings. That's where the expense comes in, because you're pumping water up, you're trying to take waste down, you have to put in lifts, and there's a whole load of different things that become problematic. You know, they are, you know, I'm not going to, well, I won't say what they are, but they're kind of egos. Big tall buildings are about egos, and you know, while they serve, you know, the egos, they don't necessarily serve the community. Like the Empire Estates, when it was built originally, there was nobody in it because nobody could afford to actually rent the units. I think it went bankrupt, and then the prices came down. So those buildings, when you build those big buildings, there's a big price tag on them, and people can't afford to live in them. So you're better sticking at 6-7 stories.
Okay, I mean, I think it's clear that nobody in the panel wants us to go 10, 12, 15, 20 stories. Owen, you'd like us to go higher?
You see, a lot of the public debate, particularly by some proponents of a number of individual projects, have misrepresented everybody's position on this. The Dublin City Council Development Plan, the outgoing plan, has 11 locations where you can have what are considered high-storey buildings. So I agree with Francis and Cian and Rebecca. In the main, what we want is a high-density, mid-rise, mixed-use city like Copenhagen or Berlin, etc. And all of those cities have identified locations where you can go higher. Dublin City Council recently tried to have their own strategic development zone for the Docklands amended to allow a 22-storey block down at the further north stretch, and Port Pleanála refused it. So what we want is, we want sustainable development, which means in the main mid-rise, an appropriate amount of high-rise where it fits. But here's the crucial point. For this to be sustainable, it has to be affordable. And the average all-in development cost for apartments currently, for example, in the city, at the bottom end is €400,000. And that's why the leasehold proposal we've made for owner-occupiers is really key, because it means not just the first purchaser gets an affordable price, it means all future purchasers of those properties are affordable. John is incorrect. People will be allowed to give these properties to their children and grandchildren. There's no rules about that. They will also be able to sell to whoever they want. What we want is a permanent stock of privately owned, tradable and permanently affordable homes, and especially in our city, because yes, there will be lots of people, including me, who want to rent, but there will be lots and lots of people who want to own their own properties. And therefore, the model we've provided ensures that those properties will be affordable in perpetuity. We'll have
how do you sell it to whomever you want if you don't own the land that it's on?
Because the way in which it will be set up is just like the first affordable purchaser purchases it, it then gets sold on to future affordable purchasers.
If they meet a certain income criteria.
At a future affordable.
If they meet a certain income criteria.
At a future affordable purchase price.
I'm going to ask you guys to keep it through me rather than talking over one another.
Apologies, Michelle, but I do think it's an important point, because if the person whom you're wanting to sell the property onto doesn't actually fit in the income criteria that is set out at a point in time, well, then you won't be able to sell it onto them. I think that's a very, very important distinction.
I want to move on from that because I want to talk to you about mortgage lending rules. Now, the central bank is due to review these, and we had some interesting results in the polling that we did. People in our Ireland Thinks poll were split 47% on each side of this, whether they agree with the rules. Unsurprisingly, when you break that down, people who are renting, people who are living with parents are more on the side of changing it. People who own their own homes think that everything's fine as it is. So, I mean, who thinks that the rules should change? Nobody. Richard, can I bring you in on that one?
Sorry, it depends on what you mean by change. But if we mean making the mistake of lending people money for overpriced housing and saddling them with huge amounts of debt that they may have difficulty paying further down the line, and in other words, repeating the disastrous mistakes that were made in the pre-crash Celtic Tiger period, I'm certainly not for doing that.
What about reducing the amount of money people have to save as a deposit in order to get a mortgage, or tying rent, the rent that they've paid over the previous 5 or so years into the application process?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot of the time the real problems in terms of the assessment of people's ability to pay, whether it's on that deposit piece or on the failure to take into account how much they've been spending on rent. I absolutely agree with that. I also think we need to sort of enhance the publicly provided mortgage schemes to make them available to more people and to make them easier to access, because I certainly have come across a lot of people who really should fit the criteria for the state provided mortgage schemes, but are told they don't fit the criteria. And the other thing that is absolutely critical in this is the bank's extortionate mortgage rates in this country. And that's a real problem. The banks here are charging higher mortgage rates than anywhere in Europe. And there's no justification for it. It's pure profiteering. And it's pretty galling for people out there when you consider how much we put into the banks to put them back on their feet. And it's why, for that matter, I'm against the sort of resell off of the banks, because we have even less control over what the banks do in terms of these extortionate mortgage rates. So I personally think we need a sort of public, not-for-profit banking system that will charge people affordable mortgage interest rates as against the extortionate ones that were here. But what I would not like to see is a sort of splurge of credit that is linked to excessively high prices, where people are are purchasing houses based on credit, which the prices of which are dangerously high, from not just from the point of view of their ability to pay in the future, but also from that macroeconomic point of view, which led to the crash the last time.
Okay, Cian, I'll bring you in on this one.
Yeah, there's a real issue here that people who are paying more in rent than they would be paying in a mortgage if they could get a mortgage, and they have a difficulty then in terms of when it comes to buying a home, competing with investment funds which are driving up prices and are putting a lot of money into the system. And the mortgage rules are quite correctly, putting a control and a brake on individuals so that it doesn't lead to increased house prices. At the same time, the investment funds are really driving everything up by snapping things up. So there's a complete inequality here, if you like, between individual purchasers and the investment funds. Now, you can try and tackle that two ways. You can effectively loosen the mortgage rules to try and help the individual buyers, and then you'll just have more and more money going in, pushing up house prices even more, or which won't work because we already have house prices increasing very significantly. Or the other thing you can do is try and curtail the role of investment funds. So I mean, that's what I would favour. And I know there has been some measures, but there are still huge issues there where you even have the state competing against, through approved housing bodies, trying to buy up homes, competing against first-time buyers, competing against investment funds, and all that is driving up house prices. So, I mean, the answer on that is, for example, on the state side, is really for the state to be involved in, directing, contracting out the direct build of affordable or social homes rather than competing with first-time buyers and creating additional supply. That's part of it. But there's a real issue still with the investment funds and the cuckoo funds snapping things up, and including second-hand homes. And if that isn't curtailed, we're going to continue to have that escalation in house prices that individuals will be struggling against. So that's, I think, the bit that needs to be tackled.
John, I know you wanted to come in on this one. Are the mortgage rules working well?
Look, I think we need to be very careful with the macroprudential rules, the 3.5 times income. We have tried to assist individuals and couples in purchasing their first homes through the Help to Buy scheme, which was increased in the last budget from 5% to 10%. So essentially it covers the 10% deposit and acts as a rebate on taxes paid over the last number of years. And that's actually assisted 22,500 first-time buyers in purchasing their first homes. I know that some of the opposition and colleagues on the call here don't want that scheme, and they want to abolish it for their own reasons and valid reasons, which I'm sure they put them forward. But what I get from people my own age, I'm 34 years of age. I actually only spoke to a school friend of mine yesterday who said that Help to Buy, he was asking me, will it be continued into next year? Because it's essential for him as an individual, as opposed to being in a relationship, in purchasing his first home. I obviously didn't have an answer as to whether it will continue past the end of the year. I certainly hope it will, because it's a key measure there that assists people in getting their foot on the ladder. And I think anything that the government is doing, be across the affordable housing bill, is to assist individuals and families in getting their foot on that ladder. And that's, I make absolutely no apology for doing that.
Something that was brought up earlier in the discussion was the use of compulsory purchase orders. And, that this is a very controversial topic. Something that came up in our panel discussion was that, we should just start doing it. And if the property rights, if somebody thinks the property rights are being threatened, let it be tested in the courts, and then at least we'll have an answer. So who here thinks that we should just start doing it and test that? Richard, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think we absolutely have to do it. And, when we're talking about densification and all that, one of the absolute scandals, and you only have to walk around this city or any town, look at all the empty properties. Look, 2- and 3-story buildings. You walk up Ainger Street. I met a woman on the street the other day from the flats there, and she said, look at all these buildings. They're empty. People could be living in them. Now, I don't think that should be allowed. I think local authorities should be monitoring empty properties, or for that matter, hoarded sites that could be used suitable for building. And if they are left unused, I would say for longer than 6 months, there should be an immediate investigation of why that is the case. And if there's not a justification for it, there should be a CPO slapped on it. And frankly, I'd make it quite punitive in the way it's dealt with. Do you know what I mean? I don't think anybody should profit out of CPO purchases. I think it should be a very aggressive policy of getting hold of unused property that could be used to house people by the local authorities, but also driven by central government. It's obscene, frankly, and there's an awful lot of empty property and unused sites that could be brought into use to help us address the crisis, and they're just sitting there for whatever reason. But a lot of it is just because people are sitting on assets, and they know the value of those assets is appreciating, and they don't really give a damn whether somebody could live in them or not. And I think that's unacceptable.
Rebecca, vacant properties, should we start using CPOs?
We should both use CPOs, and we should also have a vacant sites, a vacant homes tax, and that works really well in Amsterdam, for example. And what the local authority does in Amsterdam is it actually works with people to initially try and bring it back into use. And if after 6 months it isn't brought back into use, they then will put somebody into it. So I think we need to be more aggressive in that. And if we have a look at what some of the investors are doing, and people who are in build to rent, is they're actually intentionally leaving their properties empty to keep rents artificially high, or they're offering deals. So, 1 month free or 3 months, rather than actually tie people into a lower rent. And I think that's a big problem. So I think, we're too much of a carrot approach to try and get people to bring vacant homes back into use. And I think we need to be using the stick of a vacant tax. I saw some movement from the government on that, and we had mutterings from Leo Varadkar, but that seems to have been shut down. I think we need a proper system of a vacant homes tax, where if something was either giving planning permission for residential or was previously used for residential, with the obvious exceptions of homes that are in the Fair Deal scheme, I think we need to be much more aggressively going after them to make sure that they're being brought back into use. Because as Richard said, people are intentionally leaving them vacant because they know that they're sitting on an asset and they don't necessarily need the rental income from them. And we need to be much more aggressive in that.
Mary, I know you've had your hand up for a while there, so I'll come to you on this one.
Yeah, it's okay. Thanks, Michelle, for letting me in. Look, I agree, I suppose intuitively or emotionally, of course I agree. Of course we should be CPOing any lands that aren't being used to develop and aren't being put into productive use in a housing crisis. But I do think we need to be realistic with the people who are listening to this debate. And a CPO process, and I know this from the City Council myself, where I got the City Council to actually CPO properties that were being left idle in Cabra, in Fitzpatrick, in other places in my constituency. It took 10 years. It took 10 years. And that was with persistence. And as well as which, we need to recognise that the state isn't using all of the land that it has available to actually deliver homes. So that's the change we're making. We're changing things so that the state will take the lead in the delivery of homes. And that'll do two things. It won't just increase supply, but it will absolutely address the issue of affordability. Because we've all talked, I think Eoin mentioned it, I've heard Lord Kinsur talk about the cost of apartments in Dublin Central, for example, my own constituency, being at about 500,000 euros. He's talking about the cost there. And that's not me just saying it, that's, independent experts. So we need to address that affordability issue. And if we need to address that affordability issue, we need the state to intervene to use its cost advantage. And the biggest cost advantage will be in the ownership of the land. Use the land to deliver affordable homes that are truly affordable based on people's income. That's the big change. And that change is being made in terms of the legislation. It's being made in terms of the targets we'll be setting for the local authorities right around the country, in every local authority area. But the other thing is the enabling of the approved housing bodies and the housing cooperatives and the NGOs for them to deliver affordable housing. That's really important. But in the short term, I absolutely agree. And I speak with people every day who are paying way too much in rent and can't afford to purchase their own home. And it's those people that want the state to financially support them, not in 3 years' time or 4 years' time or in 10 years' time. They want the financial support now to reduce the amount of money they're paying on rent and to be able to purchase their own home. And on that basis, that's what the Help to Buy scheme and the shared equity scheme will do. The shared equity scheme is be targeted. It's very clearly identifying the unaffordability of the market housing and saying the state needs to financially support people so that they can actually afford a home. And in parallel, and more importantly, on a long-term basis, have the state deliver really affordable homes that are defined as being affordable based on people's income. And to do that, we need to use the state's land first. In terms of the vacancy on the rental apartments and the investments, I think it's about 96% of landlords own less than 5 properties. So we're talking about 4% of the market. It's still 4% of unacceptable vacancy in rental properties in our city. There has to be a vacant, and I pursued this, and I know the minister is pursuing this with the Minister for Finance. There has to be a vacancy tax put on apartments that are lying idle in the middle of a housing crisis here in the capital city. there's a whole range of initiatives that have to be done to protect renters and to make renting more affordable. In the short term, absolutely a vacant tax on those investment held rental properties that are lying idle. But it's also the actual rollout of the affordable cost rental at scale. That will really be the game changer, because that will provide affordability and security of tenure over a long-term basis. And the affordability will be achieved by using the state-owned lands that will reduce the actual cost. That's where we need to get to. That's what people need us to do, and that's what we're going to deliver.
Okay, I'm conscious here of the time. We don't want to keep people here all day, but I do have a couple of other questions that I want to get to before we finish up. I mean, this is just a quick one, and we'll do a hands up because people will be interested who are watching. Is anyone here on the panel a landlord themselves? No. Phew. I want to move on to an idea that came up in our expert political panel, and this was from Aidan Regan, who's an associate professor in UCD. Now, he suggested that we decentralise the power and resources to local authority level, but also a major reform of local government so that that could actually happen. Can I bring you in on that, Francis?
Yeah, the one thing I didn't fully get what he was saying, because he was also saying centralise the technical side of it, which I found odd. So, decentralise one end of it and centralise the other end of it. And so you're giving somebody a load of power and then you're taking it away. So I wasn't sure, what does that mean? Is that the LDA bringing the expertise in to, go back into all those local authorities to facilitate them to build on their lands? Like, is that what that is? So I know others will say it isn't, and I'm sure Eoin's going to talk here on this. In the building of local authority homes was taken away essentially, I think in '98 by that government, and given to developers in Part 5. And when we hit our recession, they weren't building anything, so we have a shortfall. And then when the IMF came in, we had no money to borrow to build in that space. So we are where we are. So look, I would say what he's saying there is that's an argument, but I think that the LDA has surveyed the country, looked at where the sites are across the state, state-owned lands, is amalgamating them, master planning them to develop out cost rental and affordable purchase homes, working with the local authorities on their expertise and assisting them, and including in the AHBs where they can come in. So look at. There's going to be massive differences of opinion on this panel now over this.
That's what we want.
That's the route at the moment the government's taking. So that's where it's at. So the proof will be in the eating, I believe, when, as the lads have said, the model is set up. It's going to be put into legislation pretty quickly. The LDA has started. The affordable housing is coming this week, and then it will be really about, for me anyway, is chasing the department and whoever else to make sure these things are being built. Because if they're not, then we've failed. And I'll put my hands up if we fail, but I know I'll be chomping at the bit to ensure that these things get built and in the right way, that they are affordable, and there are those mechanisms where people can get affordable homes, whether it's rented or affordable purchase, within the schemes that are there, which haven't been there for 10 years. So and I think that's been a big difference. Most of us, I know Eoin was on the council, and Mary and Rebecca, I think, and Cian, we've all been on the council. There were no schemes for the last 10 years. And I remember voting on things where we wanted affordable purchase for other schemes that you could rent through, and they weren't there. So you were making these difficult decisions between social and private. And I know personally I voted for things because it's better off having houses built that can be accommodated than none at all. And I know I've been chastised in the past for voting for private housing and public land. But for me, it was like, at the time when I made that decision, it was felt, right, we need houses because we're in a crisis. So, but they were the only models available to us. So it was either none at all or like, let's get something. So that was the position I took then. And I am where I'm at now. We've achieved 100% public housing and public land, which I will continue to fight for in Dublin and Cork. Whether that, the minister may make decisions. I know Deputy, Broin has talked about that, but I know for me personally, I will be pushing as hard as I can. And going back to the ERSI thing, I have put in PQs to the department to seek what's the story about that money. And we're going to pursue that and continue to pursue to find out, right, why can't we use it? And they're not saying we can't use it. So it is a political, I think it's a political decision. So I can put my hand up and say I will be continuing to push that we should be spending more to build, more public housing.
Okay, Eoin, I'm going to bring you in on that. Should we decentralise power to local government?
Absolutely. The single biggest delaying factor in the delivery of public housing on public land is the dead hand of the Department of Housing's four-stage approval process and the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform's Public Spending Code. It adds 18 to 24 months between planning approval by elected members and a brick being laid in the ground. And that then means there's another 12 months to build. And there are two central problems. The first is central government does not want to let local authorities be the masters of their own housing developments. And therefore, everything has to be double checked. Everything has to be double crossed and approved. And secondly, central government simply does not want to fund large scale local authority projects. And probably the biggest scandal we came across recently was after Dublin City Council did a really good job and their councillors supported the Poolbeg Strategic Development Zone, Dublin City Council management, to ensure that there would be 600 genuinely affordable homes as agreed by the elected members, negotiated with NAMA to buy the land at a reduced price, and then Dublin City Council would be the developer to guarantee those affordable homes along with the social. The Department of Housing would not sanction the purchase of that land at a 60% discount. The Minister of Housing at the time, Owen Murphy, wouldn't intervene. And why? Because the department would not trust Dublin City Council to deliver the project. So if we want to have the 20,000 public homes, social, affordable cost rental and affordable purchase that all experts have agreed on, the only way we'll do that is removing the shackles from our local authorities, approved housing bodies, co-ops and community housing trusts, but crucially, giving them the money to go and build and renovate the pre-existing derelict homes that people need. That's going to require a culture change, which we have yet to see from government, and a level of investment that, despite everything I've heard today, has yet to be committed to. Obviously, we'll wait to the budget to see what the level of investment is, but it's one thing saying you want these homes. You have to put the money on the table, and you have to let the local authorities and the other agencies build those homes at genuinely affordable home prices to rent or buy, as well as increase social housing beyond the current targets, because we haven't even touched on the homelessness crisis, which is still raging throughout our cities and towns.
Okay, to legislate as well, though, Michelle, to be fair on that point.
Sorry, Mary, I'm going to ask you guys to go through me just because we don't want chaos here. And I want to move on to one final topic from our expert panel, which they themselves were kind of split on. And it's this idea of a citizens' assembly on housing. Now, we've seen citizens' assemblies work quite well in different areas, but some of our experts thought, why spend time on something like that when we already know what a lot of the solutions are? So who wants to come in on that? John, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, thanks very much, Michelle. Look, I can see why the panel was split on it. What the government is obviously doing is having a housing commission, and certainly there's a programme for government commitment in relation to a referendum on the right to housing, which will hopefully come from that. But a really important point that I want to make in relation to a previous one on vacancy is because it drives people mad, and justifiably so, because there's vacant properties right across every town, city and village in the country. But we do have a scheme in the repair and lease scheme, which unfortunately hasn't been utilised by many local authorities except for my own in Waterford. In fact, Waterford accounts for 50% of all repair and lease units in the country. It's unforgivable that only 20 odd repair and lease units have been provided in the 4 Dublin local authorities, but yet there's been 114 provided in Waterford, and that's had a dramatic impact on
Can I ask on that, John? Has the government looked into why local authorities are not using it?
Well, I can only speak for my own local authority in Waterford, and the reason why it has been such a huge success is because the local authority and the officials and the engineers inside the council actively went out and pursued those vacant properties, threatened a lot of the properties essentially with CPOs, but said, well, actually, if you want to bring your house back into use here, there is this repair and lease scheme that can provide €60,000 of the upfront costs of renovating a derelict house. And once you provide the local authority with a social lease for at least 20 years. And that's having a really positive impact. It's reduced our family homelessness in Waterford by 93% and 55% on individual homelessness, because predominantly it provides city centre accommodation of 1 and 2 bed properties. And I'm really passionate about this scheme, and I really believe that if it's working in Waterford and has been such a huge success in having an impact in Waterford, it can absolutely happen in every town, village and city in the country. But the will has to be there from the local authority officials to go out there and actively pursue that scheme. Money is there, the government is absolutely behind it, but we need the local authorities to step up to the plate in relation to that scheme, because it is having an impact on vacancy.
Okay, I want to bring us back to this idea of the Citizens' Assembly. Cian, I think you wanted to come in on that.
Thanks, yeah, and I might just say on the repair and lease scheme, I mean, that's a really good example, and with derelict sites, small number of the local authorities are really, really effective in going after these things, and most of them aren't. So there has to be accountability for the local authorities that aren't, and that's very, very important point. Just on I think, look, building a consensus around what needs to be done in housing, is that valuable? Has that been effective in other areas? Yes, it has. The danger here is that the Housing Commission or Citizens' Assembly, that any of these things could be used to delay when we already know what needs to be done. So if you take, for example, the referendum on the right to housing, that's in the programme for government, it's being committed to. A number of NGO experts have come up with a proposed wording on that. They have consensus around that. And yet there seems to be a bit of a delay at the government level, when we need to get that referendum happening as soon as possible, and we need to get that into the Constitution, because that will help. It won't solve everything around housing, but it will help on a number of different issues. So yeah, I think there's a value to Citizens' Assembly, Housing Commission, but definitely not as a kind of delaying tactic. We should be getting on with what we know works now, and then we can be having discussions around building a consensus at the same time. That's the kind of approach I would take. Okay,
I'm going to give Mary the last word on this, since I cut you off earlier.
Thanks, Michelle. You're very good. Just on that, I agree. We can't be delaying on this. The housing crisis is urgent. And I suppose that's why the government has moved with such urgency to introduce such radical legislation that does dramatically change the state's role in the provision of housing, both in terms of affordability and security of tenure. But in terms of the Commission on Housing, a chair has been appointed, Cian, and I think that's important. And I think there's broad support for the Commission on Housing, because we all recognise that there are many complex issues that need to be addressed with. But we need to do them both in parallel, and that's what the government is doing. It is focusing in the immediate short term in terms of trying to increase supply and increase affordability. But it's also trying to address these long-term issues. And I absolutely commend the NGOs who have been involved in the Home for Good campaign. We had them in at the Joint Oireachtas Committee, and they are campaigning for a right to housing. I brought a motion to the Seanad on the right to housing, and there was unanimous cross-party support for a constitutional amendment to insert the right to housing in Bunrocks and Heron. It's really important, I believe, that we do that. But we also need to be very clear that alone, there is no silver bullet. That alone is not going to fix the housing crisis. It's not going to ensure that tomorrow morning everybody has a home that meets their needs. So it's not one intervention. I do think the Housing Commission is going to be very important. It will engage all the relevant stakeholders, and it will take a long-term strategic approach. But we can't do one or the other. We need also to be addressing in the immediate for people the supply and affordability issues. And that's what we're doing in terms of the most comprehensive affordable housing legislation, and in terms of the powers that we're giving to the local authorities and the approved housing bodies to actually deliver secure, affordable homes, both to purchase and rent.
Okay, I'm going to finish up there. I want to thank our TDs and senators who joined us for this political discussion. It was very civilised, I have to say. And thanks to everyone who joined us to watch this afternoon. If you're interested in the rest of the work that the Good Information Project has done on the housing crisis, you'll find it on the Journal. And I just want to mention that the next issue for the Good Information Project is public transport, which is an issue that's deeply related to housing and urban planning. So do keep an eye out over the coming weeks for the articles that we have on the site about that. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.